Okay, so we're continuing our series. Since the start of this year, we've been doing a series looking right through the Gospel of John. It's a long series, much longer than we've done for a while, but we wanted to go right through that book. And one of the things that is apparent when you start studying it, I've talked about this, is that the book divides into two bits. There's what John calls, he bases the first part around 7 miracles, and he calls these signs. Because they point to who Jesus is. And we're coming to the last sign this morning, the last of the 7, and it's a biggie, it's the biggest. And I'm not going to tell you what it is in advance, but I'm going to try you on a line and see how many of you recognize where this line comes from. Space, the final frontier. Where's it come from? Star Trek. How many knew it came from Star Trek? Okay, that most people know that line from Star Trek, and it's kind of, I've known it, I think, since I was quite a small kid. I'm not sure I saw the first run of Star Trek, but I definitely saw the first set of repeats back in the 1960s. I was allowed to stay up and watch it, so that shows you what size I was. And I love those old Star Trek things. I like those shaky sets and the aliens that didn't quite look like they were made up properly. Cheryl is obviously more sophisticated than me. She likes the modern film versions. I think she just likes Chris Pine, but generally she likes the modern film versions. She seems to watch anything he's in. But she loves these. But the thing for me is that out of it all, those lines stick. Space, the final frontier, and to go where no man has gone before. And I think the reason that space, the final frontier, sticks in your head is that word final. That is the final frontier. And of course, if you know Star Trek, you know that they didn't stop at the final frontier. They went beyond it. And they kept going, and they had all sorts of adventures, and still are having adventures today. Now, my goal in telling you that is not to make you old Trekkies. You know, I go to Comic-Con every year, because as lots of you know, I collect vintage comics. But I go to Comic-Con, and they have all these Trekkies there, and people dressed in Star Wars, and all sorts of things. But I don't want to make you Trekkies, but it's that word, those words, the final frontier. And the reason it kind of triggered something, it triggered the geek in me. The reason it did that is when I was preparing for this talk, I typed into my Google, death. And it came up with, listen to it, death, the final surrender. Death, the final journey. Death, the final enemy. Death, the final call. Death, the final destination. And of course, death, the final frontier. So that's what triggered the geek in me. And there's something about it, isn't it? That it's that word, final. Final is final. Or is it? And that's what we're going to explore this morning. And that brings us to this 7th of John's signs. Now, this one is probably the most famous. Even if you don't know the whole story, even if you've not read it for years or not heard it for years, you probably know the character who's in this event. He's a guy called Lazarus. And I remember like years ago, I don't know how many years ago, but there was a song that I used to listen to. Anybody remember Carmen? Yeah, Roger's nodding. Yeah, we're all dated now. And he had a song, and it was called Lazarus Come Forth. And so whenever I see these words, Lazarus, I always add come forth on the end of it in a kind of big booming voice. I'm not going to sing the song, because as you know, that would empty the room. So I'm not going to do that. Okay. But we're going to look at Lazarus this morning. And when we start this, Jesus has just been in another argument with the religious people. He's had quite a few of those over the last few weeks, hasn't he? Just been another argument. He's at the temple, And the religious leaders are not only attacking him, but they're refusing to believe in him, even though he's done these miracles in plain sight of everyone. And what's happening here, if you think about it, is when you refuse to believe something despite the evidence, then that says something about you. But in this case, it said a whole lot about the Pharisees, because if Jesus was doing good things and they didn't believe he was who he said he was, really what they were doing is attributing what he was doing not to God, but to the devil. And this miracle we're going to talk about this morning, this brings everything to a head about which side they're going to stand on. So Jesus tries to clarify that for them. And this is kind of one of my favourite verses in the Bible. I probably talk about it more than any other verse. And it's John chapter 10, verse 10. And it says this: I am the gate. Those who come in through me will be saved. They will come and go freely and will find good pasture. So that's all good. And here's the bit that I quote lots. The thief, the enemy, the devil, the thief's purpose is to steal and kill and destroy. My purpose, said Jesus, is to give a rich life, a satisfying life in all its fullness. Now, I don't know about you, but that seems really clear to me. That if it's good, it's God, and if it's bad, it's not God, it's the enemy. And sometimes people get confused on this, even now, and you might have been confused by it, by somebody who was confused by it, and they attribute bad things to God. And their idea is God does bad things to you in order to get you to pay attention. But that's completely contradictory to what Jesus is saying here. God is the guy that's doing the good. And the enemy is the one who is coming to steal, kill, and destroy in your life. He's coming to steal your health. He's coming to steal your finances. He's coming to murder your relationships. He's the one who's got that agenda. But God's agenda is that you shall have life and life to the full. And so there's a really clear dividing line. And Jesus is trying to point that out to these Pharisees and all the crowd who are there. And some of them are getting it and some of them are not getting it. And despite all the evidence and despite Jesus trying to explain this to them, the Pharisees and the religious people, instead of coming down on the side of Jesus is good because he's doing good things, they come down on the side of Jesus is bad. And this is what it says. When he said these things, the people were again divided in their opinions about him. Some said he's demon-possessed and out of his mind. They are attributing good things to a bad source. Why listen to a man like that? Others said, it doesn't sound like a man possessed by a demon because demons can't open the eyes of the blind. So you've got this real polarization between two groups of people. And they start arguing and they start having a go at each other in the temple. And a little later, that same day, Jesus is again at the temple and the people surround him on the back of all this stuff that's been going on, and they ask him a big question. The biggest question that you or I need to answer for ourselves. Who are you? This is what it said. How long are you going to keep us in suspense? If you are the Messiah, tell us plainly. Now that word Messiah means the one who is anointed to be God's final king. The one who brings in the final kingdom as its king. The King of Kings, Lord of Lords is what it means. And Jesus replies, I have already told you who I am. And you don't believe me. The proof is in what you've seen, the work I do in my Father's name. And at that point, they all realize he's claiming to be God. He's claiming to be that Messiah, God in human form, that final king. And they realize that. And instead of looking at the evidence that this is all good, they plump down on the evidence that that's a bad thing. And so once again, they react. And it says the people picked up stones to throw at him. This is somebody who's gone about healing people, doing good wherever he went and setting people free. And they're picking up stones to throw at him because he doesn't fit their picture of who they want to be the Messiah. And that's something we all need to be careful of. We need to take Jesus for who he is, not try and fit him in to who we want him to be. Not try and just believe in him because we want something. And if you remember, they've been through all those sort of questions, and he's done miracles to show them the truth of who he is. So, and then Jesus does that kind of Jesus thing. They sought again to seize him, but he escaped out of their hand. I don't know how he does that, but he keeps disappearing, doesn't he? Or like there's a big crowd of people and suddenly he's not there. And I don't know how he does it, but what I do know is in his resurrection body, he carried on doing it. And I get one of them, so I get to go one day. So we're picking up the story, and this is where we kind of look towards the events around Lazarus. So we pick it up. Here's where we pick it up. Now, a man named Lazarus was ill. He was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. They've appeared earlier on in the story. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay ill, was the same one who poured expensive perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So the sisters sent word to Jesus, Lord, the one you love is sick. So they're sending a messenger to go get Jesus. And Jesus is a long way away by this point in time. And so they send him. And there's some things about this. Bethany, which is the place where Lazarus was and Mary was and Martha was, is often referred to as Jesus' favourite place on earth. When you read all the different accounts of Jesus' life, one of the things that you find out is that he spent a lot of time here. He was always looked after and helped by Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. He's always visiting their house. It's kind of his favourite go-to place to get away when the crowds have followed him and he's exhausted and he just wants some time away with friends and with his disciples. So that's what Bethany is. And when we read this, that puts it in kind of context for us, because this is a really personal story. It's personal to him. These are his close friends. They're not somebody in the crowd. These are people he knows. He's ate with, he's slept at their place, he's stayed with them, he's had, drunk wine with them, he knows them intimately. And so when he's going to get this news that Lazarus is ill, it involves real emotions for him, real shock, real pain. It's not somebody who he's never met. This is somebody he knows and he cares for. And what we're going to see is Jesus' reaction, when you put it in that context, is a bit odd. But we'll explain the reason for it. So they come and Mary and Martha send this message and they say, Jesus, the one you love is sick. Now, just imagine how close you have to be to somebody for a messenger to turn up out of the blue and refer to that person as the one you love is sick, and you know who it is. That must be how Jesus referred to Lazarus. That's kind of how he thought of him. He's the one I love. I care for that family. And so when Jesus gets this news, this is what Jesus' first response. And this is what gives the context to everything that happens afterwards. Because if you don't spot this one, you'll think he's behaving strangely, because he is in some ways. This is his response. Lazarus' sickness will not end in death. Lazarus' sickness will not end in death. But the fact is this: when you work out the time clues in the story, by the time Jesus gets this message, Lazarus is already dead. And yet Jesus says this sickness will not end in death. And that's why we need to understand what's going on and why this is so powerful and why at the end of this there's uproar. Okay? Jesus then continues. He said, it's not for God, it's for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. Now that sounds like an odd statement, doesn't it? But what he's kind of pointing out is that what's going to happen here is going to be so obvious and so massive and so amazing and so unmistakable that the reaction you should have is to glorify God. So that's what he's saying up front. What he's saying up front is that death is not the final frontier. And the glory he's talking about is that death isn't the end. Because he came to bring life and conquer death. The enemy is the one that wants to bring death. Jesus wants to bring life. And he's already told the Pharisees that. Now he's going to demonstrate it. Now, here's the slightly confusing bit. Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was for 2 more days. Do you not think that's odd? And then, after those 2 days, he said to his disciples, let's go back to Judea. So that's the question. Why did he wait? And that's what I want to help you with this morning. To understand why this is so amazing, what Jesus was trying to do, and why it created uproar at the end of it. Because this is the point, at the end of this story, this is the point at which Jesus' destiny on the cross is signed, sealed, and delivered by his enemies. So, first question, he's waiting. So, did he know Lazarus was dead? If he did, and he intended to do a miracle, why didn't he go straight away to relieve the grief of those who were grieving? And to be honest, they're questions that theologians have talked about for hundreds of years. And so I'm going to offer you my thoughts on it, because, as you know, you've put a room full of theologians who don't agree on anything, except that Jesus is king. So that's cool. But there's lots of ideas, but I'm going to tell you what I think, because I think it fits what happens. Because there's certain things that we know here. It's a bit like, do you remember when we talked about water into wine and there was kind of that mystery? There's a mystery here. It kind of needs Hercule Poirot to come and solve it, really. But let's just see what we've got. So Jesus loved Mary, Martha, and Lazarus. That's how this starts. So love is a factor that overarches everything. Jesus is operating, as he always does, out of love. But in this case, he's operating out of personal love for these people as well, not just general love. The second thing we know is he waits 2 days before setting off. So these are the facts. I'm doing my lawyer bit. And thirdly, yes, he did know Lazarus was dead. In verse 14, it says, Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus is dead. We also know that when he said we're going back to Bethany, the disciples said, we don't want to. And they said to him, this is verse 8, Rabbi, they said, only a few days ago, the people were trying to stone you, remember? And then he disappeared. They were trying to stone him. That's the last thing that happened that people are aware of. People were trying to stone you. Are you going to go there again? The next thing that we have to build into this is, because Lazarus is dead, people are in pain, people are grieving. And that deeply troubles Jesus. And it says he became angry. And it says, when Jesus saw her weeping, that's Mary and Martha, hang on, that's Martha. When Jesus saw her weeping and saw other people wailing with her, a deep anger welled up within him. So however we interpret this story, we've got to put all those facts into it. Yeah? Because we know that's what we're told. So let's kind of work backwards. So Jesus is angry. And he's not angry, because some people think this when they just kind of read it, that he's angry because these people are upset and grieving and in pain. He's not angry about that because he joined in with them. It says Jesus wept. He's angry with the presence of death where it ought not to be. And that's against all he came to do. So this is a confrontation between the one who brings life and the one who brings death. He says, just reminding you, he'd already told them, the thief is the one who comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And I'm come to give life. Now, we also know, don't we, that he loved Lazarus, he loved his family, and he doesn't want to make it worse for them. He waits because he knows Lazarus is already dead. And he's already said it won't end in death. Jesus knows right through this what he's going to do. In this case, what he's going to do has to have three elements to it if you think about what he said. The first thing is he's going to give a final sign that answers everybody, because they said, tell us plainly if you're the Messiah. The second thing he's going to do is he's going to still love that family, and at the end of it, they're going to know they're loved. And thirdly, what he will do is important for his disciples in what they will do after, when he's no longer here. So he's got to fulfill all those three things, and he's got a plan. And because he's cleverer than us, he can work out that plan. So when Jesus arrives, Lazarus has already been dead. So he goes back to Bethany. And Lazarus has already been dead for 4 days. Just file that in your memory, 4 days. And he was dead before Jesus, just remind you, dead before Jesus even got the message about him. And he was dead before Jesus said it will not end in death. Let me put it this way, Lazarus is embalmed. Lazarus has 75 pounds in weight of embalming ointment on him. And then he's wrapped round in layer after layer after layer after layer of cloth. And he's in a tomb with a big stone at the door. And he's been there for 4 days. Lazarus is dead. When Jesus arrived at Bethany, he was told that Lazarus had already been in the grave for 4 days. Many of the people had come to console Martha and Mary in their loss. When Martha got word that Jesus was coming, she went to meet him. But Mary stayed in the house. Mary's really annoyed with Jesus. Martha's just annoyed with Jesus. Martha said to Jesus, Lord, if you'd been here, my brother wouldn't have died. But even now, I know that God will give you whatever you ask. Now, let me just paraphrase this. Martha is saying, just right up front, Jesus, the fact that my brother is dead in a tomb is your fault. It's your fault. And there's kind of lots of discussion because people like to write books about these sort of things. And you get my chapter tomorrow, so you get my bit. But there's lots of discussion about what exactly Martha means by this. And it's not just her, because when Mary's got over being really angry and she's just down to angry, she comes out and she says the same thing to Jesus. It's your fault. And if you take those words at face value, it's difficult to understand. But here's what I think. I think they're saying, Jesus, you weren't here. We acknowledge, by the time you got the message, he was already dead. We know that now because he died straight away after we sent the message. But you weren't here. And why weren't you here? The reason you weren't here is because you've gone around upsetting people, Jesus. You've upset the authorities. You've caused problems. People want to stone you. You've involved us in all this. And all the religious leaders have turned against you. And they ended up, last time you were here, trying to stone you. And can't you see, Jesus, that the course you are following is affecting us all? Why are you doing this? Why do you have to do it like this? Couldn't you take an easier route? Couldn't you just keep everybody happy? Why do you have to be so direct? Because you're not just causing trouble for yourself, Jesus. You're causing trouble for everybody who knows you. This is affecting all your friends, and my brother's dead because you've chosen to take this route, this course of action. That's what she's saying. That's hard, isn't it? That's hard to hear if you love somebody and they come out and say that sort of thing to you. And sometimes, in our relationship with Jesus, it can seem a bit like that, can't it? It can seem like we can't explain why this isn't working out how we wanted it to work out. We don't see how this can turn around. We don't see how it can get better. And for some people, we work our way through that. But some of us end up kind of judging Jesus and kind of pulling back a bit. And when we find ourselves in that place, then we go here. We go to this story to understand why and what's happening. Because the point of this story is that what seems like the end of the story for us, what seems like the end of the story for you, may not be the end of the story with Jesus. And too often we just get stuck. Like, this is hopeless. I can't see any way out of this. I can't see any way my life can change. I'm just buried under all this stuff. Why did this happen to me? And Jesus is saying, it's not the end of the story. I came to bring life. So if I'm on the scene, then we're bringing life into the scene. So what we find out from that, isn't it, is that Martha's faith, she's kind of got a little bit of that. She's kind of hanging on as much as she can to Jesus, at the same time being angry and disappointed with him. I don't know if you've ever been there. You kind of hang on to Jesus, but you're a bit annoyed with him because he doesn't seem to be working for you. And you know what you're asking him for doesn't seem to have come through yet. And so she's still holding on to Jesus. And while she might not understand everything, because she knows Jesus, she trusts him. Even though she's annoyed with him, she still trusts him. And Jesus says to her at the end of that kind of accusation that this is kind of your fault, Jesus says this: your brother will rise again. This is not the end of the story. And she gets it wrong. She doesn't understand what he's saying. She thinks he's saying, and this is to quote her, yes, Martha said, he'll rise again when everybody else rises on the last day. So Lazarus gets his turn when we all get our turn and we rise again. That's what she thinks is going to happen. So she's put her hope out into the future. And this is where Jesus makes this incredible statement where, they said, tell us plainly who you are. This is what he says. I am. That word, when he says I am, That's actually God's name in the Old Testament. That's the name God gives himself. I am. I am the resurrection and the life. Really famous verse. Anyone who believes in me will live even after dying. Everyone who lives in me and believes in me will never, ever die. What he's saying here is, I am the source of life. There isn't another source of life. Life comes from me. I created it. Apart from me, apart from Jesus, there is no eternal life. Because eternal life, Jesus defines, not just as you live beyond the grave and you've got another existence. Eternal life, Jesus defines as knowing God and being with God. So apart from Jesus, you cannot get to know God and be with God. And Jesus says, in the end, for every single one of us who believe in him, death is not the end because he overcomes death. I am the resurrection and life. And now, having said that, he's going to prove it to everybody, to all the crowd who were there. All those people that are grieving with Mary and Martha, all the people who've now gathered around. And here's the point. Lazarus is dead. Everybody knows he's dead. He's embalmed. He's got 75 pounds of embalming ointment on him, and he's wrapped and all that, and he's in the tomb. And so Jesus says, where is he? Where have you put him? Because he wasn't there when they buried him. And he goes to the tomb, and all the crowd follow him. Now, here's the point, and this is kind of where I'm going to do the unraveling the detective stuff, so you need to listen carefully. You know, like in that final scene when Poirot has all the culprits in one room. This is your moment. You're all in one room. Okay? Here's what happens. Jesus has given life to people before. We know that, don't we? The second of the signs, he gave life to somebody. But when he's given life before, they haven't been dead very long. Lazarus has been dead 4 days and he's embalmed. So for those who asked him, how long are you going to keep us in suspense? If you're the Messiah, tell us plainly. The answer is, I'm going to keep you in suspense for 4 days. Because Jesus is going to do his final proof, his final sign, his final work at the final frontier of death. And this final sign is going to show that Jesus is God because he gives life. And it's going to be so amazing and incontrovertible that nobody can argue about it. So, to understand that, why 4 days? What's that all about? Why didn't he do it straight away? As I've said, different people have different ideas on this. But a lot of them, and the one I like, and I think is right, goes along the following lines. Remember, it says, Jesus was still angry as he arrived at the tomb. A cave with a stone rolled across its entrance. Roll the stone aside, Jesus told them. But Martha said, the dead man's sister, protested, Lord, he has been dead for 4 days and the smell will be terrible. I like the King James version of that verse. The King James version of that verse, and it cracks me up when I read it, is, Lord, by this time he stinketh exceedingly. Don't you like that? He stinketh exceedingly. He's been dead 4 days. And though Jesus had raised 2 others from the dead, those instances had been on their deathbeds. They're not in a tomb, embalmed. And this is really interesting. Jesus then says something to the disciples. And he says this to you, because you're his disciples. Anybody who follows Jesus is a disciple. And he's saying this to you. with Jesus, there are no limitations to what he can do for those who believe. We are the ones that put those limitations on him by thinking in terms of what we can do. In terms of what Jesus can do, there are no limitations to what he can do. So he told them plainly, Lazarus is dead, and for your sakes, this is talking to the disciples, and again, this must have been astonishing to that crowd. For your sakes, I'm glad I wasn't there when he died, for now you will really believe. Come on, let's go see him. Part of why he waited so long was for the disciples to nail for them finally so their faith would endure when he was no longer there. That he is the one who overcomes death. Now, this 4 days. Jewish traditions. So remember, a lot of when the religious people start to attack Jesus and complain about him and try and stop him, it's all based around their oral traditions and not actually around the law. And this is another one of those. Because in the oral traditions are written down in various books and things, generally referred to as either the Talmud or the Tegan. Okay? And in those books, it said, and this is what people believed in Jesus' time, this is what the crowd are believing, that corruption of the body, decay of the body began on the third day. Not a medical thing, they just believed it began on the third day. And the reason that they believed that is that in these books that rabbis over the centuries had written, they thought that the spirit of the person who was dead hung around for 3 days before going to Abraham's bosom to be with, where people went who were Jews at that time. So they believed that was 3 days and the spirit was still around. So in their minds, in the first two things, Jesus had just put the spirit back in the body, but it hadn't gone anywhere. Here, the spirit's gone because this is 4 days. And Jesus is using this to prove that he is who he said he was, but more to the point, he can do what is impossible according to the rabbis. I don't know about you, but I don't know how a body smells after 4 days in a hot country. I'd say pretty bad. But also, decay would have set into the body. And that would have been starting to get pretty advanced in a hot climate. We're talking maggots and all that sort of thing. Horrible. But Jesus has said it's not going to end in death. So you've got the natural that everybody has in their mind. This is what's going on with that body. And you've got Jesus' words, which are completely contrary to that. This will end in death because I bring life. And what does that tell us? What's that tell you? It tells you you can trust Jesus to do what he said he will do in your life. So, we're wrapping it up now. Jesus stands before the open tomb. And Jesus responded, "Didn't I tell you that you would see God's glory if you believed?" So they rolled the stone aside. Then Jesus looked up to heaven and said, "Father, thank you for hearing me." When did he hear him? When Jesus said this will not end in death. You always hear me, but I said it out loud for the sake of all these people standing here so that they will believe you sent me. Then Jesus shouts so everybody can hear, "Lazarus, come forth." And the dead man, I don't know where the stone's gone at this point. The dead man came out, his hands and feet bound in the grave clothes. So he's coming out like this because nobody's helping him. He's coming out with all his embalming fluid on, all his grave clothes on. his hands and feet bound in grave clothes, his face wrapped in a headcloth. He can't see where he's going. I don't know what this looked like. But Jesus told them, unwrap him and let him go. All the stuff that holds you and the enemy has brought into your life to steal, kill, and destroy, Jesus can take it off and unwrap it and remove it. So what's this for us? For us, he shows he's life giver. It's who he is. He's death overcomer. He's the source of eternal life. He's God's final king, God's final solution, God's final answer, and God's final message to everyone. Where there's no hope, he is hope. Where there's no answers, he's the answer. There is life for all who believe in him. He is the one who goes beyond the final frontier and says that's just the beginning. And I could end there, but there's a little postscript. Okay? Bear with me another couple of minutes. Can I have the worship team back, please? Because if you remember, John's agenda isn't simply that you know the story. John's agenda is that you believe the story and apply it to your life. Here's the problem. Remember what we talked about last week. There are still those who refuse to believe despite what they see in front of them, because they don't want to believe, because Jesus doesn't fit their agenda. And it's just shocking. Because the next thing that happens, then the leading priests and Pharisees called the high council together. What are we going to do? They asked each other. I think this is one of the saddest moments in the Bible. This man certainly performs many miraculous signs. They don't even doubt who he is now. They just don't want him. If we allow him to go on like this, soon everyone will believe in him and they will stop following us. That's what they're saying. So from that time on, they began to plot his death. Jesus gave life and it signed his own death warrant. They could not stand that he could do what they said was impossible. And there might be stuff in your life that looks impossible. You might have got to the point where you're saying, it's the end, this is never going to turn out. This is never going to work out for me. But what seems like the end for you is never the end with Jesus. Because those who didn't want to believe, this is what they missed. When they decided that Jesus' execution was inevitable, when they decided that he was going to be nailed to a cross, when they decided they would lie about him to get him on that cross, they forgot one thing, and it's the same thing that the enemy forgot, the one who comes to steal, kill, and destroy. And this is what they forgot. They forgot that death is not the end. Death is not the final frontier. And Jesus came to prove it. Jesus came to give it for us all. And Jesus is the one who can do that impossible thing for you. Amen.